Hi guys, Tim here from ECU Testing. Today we're going to go through a common fault you often see when checking for engine system fault codes. The fault code in question is P0606 PCM/internal processor fault. This fault can really trip you up because its description implies the engine ECU has failed internally. But often it's just plain wrong and the fault is being caused by something else on the engine system. The presence of this code will cause symptoms such as a constant check engine light, rough idle, limp mode, and complete non-start of the vehicle. Despite the fault code saying that it's an internal processor fault, not all ECUs reporting this fault code are actually internally faulty. Your engine ECU can easily be fooled into reporting a problem with itself when actually it's completely fine, which makes diagnosing the fault very difficult. But not today. I'm going to expose some of the most common causes of the P0606 fault and how you can test for them. One of the most common and often overlooked causes of P0606 is a damaged fuse. You may have checked the voltage at the fuse and found no problems, but it's only when a high load is demanded by the ECU that the supply voltage will fluctuate. Often this will cause internal circuits to malfunction, making the ECU think there's an internal failure. Make sure to check the resistance of the fuses with a multimeter to rule out a damaged fuse. Whilst we're talking about voltage supply, the next step is to ensure the ECU is receiving correct battery voltage and grounds at the connector, as wiring issues are very common causes of the P0606 fault code. High resistance in the loom or corrosion to the connecting terminals can cause the same fluctuation of voltage in high demand situations. To diagnose this, check the battery voltage and grounds at the ECU connector terminals. And if the voltage isn't the same as the voltage at the battery, then you may have high resistance in the wiring between the battery and ECU. Also make sure to check the battery connections, as this could be a factor. Plus, it's a simple fix. The connection should be free of corrosion and must be a tight fit. Now let's talk about battery health. We see lots of P0606 faults caused by a poor battery, either by a poor state of charge, which is a measure of how much energy is stored in the battery, or state of health, which is a measure of the battery's ability to produce the minimum cold cranking amps. A battery state of health is the main concern when considering a battery failure for a P0606 fault. This is more obvious in cold weather due to the increase in cranking load, which puts more demand on the battery. If the code is generated during engine cranking, then the battery is likely struggling to produce the cranking amps needed. To check this, you'll require a specialist battery analyzer to check the minimum CCA capacity. Next, let's look at state of charge. You should expect to see a reading of between 12.4 and 12.6 volts for a good state of charge. If your reading is below 12 volts, this will be an indication of a bad battery. However, if the difference between the low voltage reading and the standard 12.6 volt reading is divisible by 2.1, we can safely determine that the battery has a dead cell. This is because regular wet batteries comprise of 6 cells that provide 2.1 volts each. So when one cell goes bad, the final voltage reading will be reduced by 2.1 volts, 2 by 4.2 volts, and so on. You may have a scenario of a present P0606 internal processor fault, which is accompanied with other fault codes relating to sensor circuit faults. Again, this could be a false positive. But before condemning the ECU, check the sensor reference voltages and grounds. This should be done at the sensor. If either are missing, then remove the sensor and test at the connector. And if the signal returns, then you have a faulty sensor. If the signals don't return, then test the signal at the ECU. If the voltage is present, then you have a wiring fault to the sensor. But if the signals are not present, then you have a faulty ECU, which you'll need to send in to us for a full rebuild. If you're running a diesel engine with P0606 and secondary faults for fuel delivery errors or injector circuit faults, then check your injectors, as a bad injector can cause a P0606 fault. A simple resistance comparison check of the injectors could highlight the problem. With the ignition turned off and battery disconnected, remove the connectors from the injectors and compare the resistance values of each terminal and the injector body on all the injectors. For a common rail diesel injector, we would expect a terminal reading of between 0.4 and 0.8 ohms. None of the terminals should connect to the body. For piezo common rail injectors, we would expect a terminal resistance of between 150 and 210 kilo ohms. Again, none of the terminals should connect to the body. If this test shows no faults and all the injectors measure the same, the next step is to check the connector terminals for damage, and then check the resistance of the wiring back to the ECU. Of course, if all of these potential causes check out as OK, then you will need to send us your ECU for inspection and rebuild. Thanks for joining us again. Be sure to smash that like button and subscribe to be notified of our new videos. Take care, guys.